You're listening to the UnderGunned Productions podcast, Indie and Proud, taking home recording to a whole new level. All things cool, gear, beer, production tips and tricks, and a whole lot of other cool shit. Interviews with your favorite members of the UnderGunned team, and some surprise special guests. So sit back and enjoy the podcast.
Hello and good day, everybody. Jeremiah here from UnderGunned Productions coming at you guys with a new episode of our podcast, The Art of Living Creatively. And today I have a super cool guest on the line, all the way from down in Nashville, Tennessee, Haze Anderson. Haze is a drummer first and foremost, but over the last few years, he's moved into the world of electronic music making. But he works strictly with analog gear only and does not rely on the computer for anything other than using it to capture his performances. When you see his studio, it almost looks like something out of a sci-fi movie with all these different synths, sequencers, effects units, all chained and synced together to work together in the most crazy, insane, and creative way I think I've ever seen. Even though I'm not a huge follower of that style of music, when I watched a few of his YouTube videos, I was completely blown away. So before I bring Haze out here, I'm just going to play a clip from one of his tracks for you guys to check out, and then we'll get this show started.
It's better to burn out than to fade away.
Hell yeah, pure creative insanity. Well, welcome to the show, Haze. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us here. So maybe let's just start by sharing a little bit of your past history, where you grew up, what first influenced you musically, and what inspired you creatively.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Tennessee. I was born in Nashville, but I never really was part of that music scene. I grew up in a small town called Murfreesboro, where there's a nice college there that has a recording industry program. But long before I got to that, I had three aunts in particular I can think of that were really into music. They were not too much older than I was, so they were like in high school during the 70s, and they had this amazing album collection that they kind of left behind at my grandmother's house. So when I would visit my grandmother's house, like during the late 70s, early 80s, I would listen to these records, and It cultured me very well, I think. It introduced me to all of the good 70s rock and roll, And they had a lot of singles collections, too, which was also interesting. So I decided pretty early on that I wanted to do something in music, and really what I wanted to play was synthesizers. But I also discovered that I just really didn't enjoy playing piano, so I knew that was going to be a problem. During elementary school, we had an opportunity to join the music program, and I picked saxophone. I believe they wanted me to play trombone, but I just, for whatever reason, decided I think to play saxophone, and I'm pretty sure it was because of Boots Randolph, as corny as that sounds. But yakety sax, was a thing. It's still a really fun song. I mean, who wouldn't want to know how to play that, right? And there was a number of other things that were happening in the 70s. Like saxophone was still a very prevalent instrument in pop and rock music in the 70s, so there was enough of that going on to, make me want to play that instrument. So I played saxophone for 7 years, on into the 80s, did the marching band thing, which I think helped me with my rhythm ultimately. It's just that steady marching kind of pulse thing, kind of drilling that into me. At some point when I was like a freshman, when I was still playing saxophone, somebody noticed that I was drumming with some pencils and asked if I played drums. And that did slowly kind of spark an interest in me to play drums. And at some point, I was into Pink Floyd. Really, that was probably my favorite band during the 70s. I was a weird kid. During the 70s and the 80s, I mean, I was way into Pink Floyd. The most people were not into Pink Floyd back then. They just weren't. Pink Floyd became a very popular band in the 90s. But the 80s, most kind of normie people, I thought Pink Floyd band was that's a weird druggy band. We don't want to listen to that. It's going to make us go crazy. So I don't know. I just really loved Pink Floyd. I think it was a lot of the ambient pad synthesizer sounds. And another band that I was into early on was Tangerine Dream. They were accessible through they did a lot of soundtracks for movies. So even though I had no access to their amazing albums that they produced in the 70s, so many movies that I liked in the 80s that I can't even think of right now. We'll say Risky Business and Thief, a couple others. I don't know, excuse me, not Thief. Yeah, Thief, but well, anyways, I did watch Thief early on. Sorry, I'm digressing now. Let's not talk about movies. But enough of that warranted that I really, really got into synthesizers. But a funny thing happened to me. I ran into a friend of mine, and I introduced him to Pink Floyd, and he introduced me to Rush. Now, all of a sudden, I'm listening to this, and the drums are just calling out to me. And wow, and then all of a sudden, when I listen to Genesis, I'm hearing the drums. When I listen to The Fix, I'm hearing the drums. Big Country, I'm like, oh yeah. Everybody heard the drums when they heard Big Country, but now all of a sudden, really noticing the drums and everything. I think before that moment in time, I really didn't know what the backbeat was. It's hard to, it's so subjective, and you can't take how you perceive something and expect anybody else to really understand, or to think that anybody else perceives it the same way that you do. And, I was introduced to a kind of controversial movie early on from Steve Martin called The Jerk, 1979. And the whole premise of that movie is that he's a white guy raised by black folks in Mississippi, and he can't feel rhythm. He can't feel the backbeat. And, one day he feels the backbeat, and he goes off, and, his parents say, go into the world now, and, and go make your fortune. And it's a pretty funny movie. It tries to be a good movie. It has a heart of gold on the inside in a weird time period. And so the whole concept of, people not knowing the beat, you know what I mean? And just a quick aside, if you do go back and you look at like worship music and folk music that comes from the black community, they tend to emphasize the 2 and the 4 out of a 4 measure of 1, 2, 3, 4. They emphasize the 2 and the 4, what we call the backbeat. But if you go and look at like what white folk tend to do, they emphasize the 1 and the 3. So it's very interesting. This could very well explain why a lot of people have a hard time understanding jazz, for example, because in jazz you have to really hang on to that backbeat, that 2 and the 4, and it's going lightning fast speed. With like a lot of fast bebop jazz, and swing is the best way to get into jazz because you can definitely feel the backbeat a whole lot more. But when I heard those drums calling to me from the Rush songs and all the other music that I've already was familiar with, and hearing it in a new light all of a sudden, I felt different. I was like, oh, okay. I was hanging out at a friend's house. Keep in mind, I'm like 16 years old at this point, and he had a drum set. Just serendipity, total coincidence, but not necessarily. A lot of kids, at that time were getting into garage bands, right? So you either, my guitar, bass. Every once in a while, you had a kid who had a drum set, and he had a drum set. I'll go over and I would try to play it right-handed. I'm left-handed. So if you're left-handed, you play the drum set completely in a mirror image. Now, there's variations of that. You can play a right-handed kit left-handed. You can play left-handed kit right-handed. But I am strictly left-handed. And one of my friend's little brother's friends, who was about 11 years old, looked at me. He said, "Hey, you're left-handed, right?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Phil Collins plays left-handed. Why don't you switch the drum set around and play left-handed?" Everybody looked at him funny, and they kind of looked at me, and my friend said, "Yeah, go ahead, switch the drum set around. I don't care." And all of a sudden, I could just play drums. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. It really made my friend mad. He got jealous real fast. I felt kind of bad in that sense, but I definitely knew that I had kind of a knack for it in a way, definitely like a talent. So I decided my senior year in high school to just quit the marching band and focus on playing drum sets. In my spare time, I got a job at Taco Bell so I could save up some money, get my first drum set, which is like a Rogers 5-piece, dated from the early 80s, 82 maybe late 70s, probably early 80s. Long gone. I have no idea where it is to this day. Later on, I replaced that kit in 97 or 98. So about 10 years later, I got a Yamaha kit, which I still have to this day. But that started the whole drum thing. That started me playing in bands, getting away from this sort of regimented, archaic, which, I think is a great thing for kids to get into today, the marching band, high school band, whatever. But it is, in the words of Frank Zappa, you're playing dead composer music. You're never going to play anything really new. It's all stuff that everybody already knows and has done before. If you're learning music for the first time, that's not a bad thing. It's a known thing. It's kind of easier to learn something that kind of people already sort of know. But you're all, as a kid, you're always going to want to do the pop music thing. You're always going to want to rock and roll, Just a quick aside, I have noticed in marching bands, modern marching bands, high school to this day, they tend to incorporate electronics now, which I don't think is really cool, honestly. And the whole point of a marching band is that you're using air, to produce all of the sound. It's all acoustic. So it's kind of cheating to introduce PA speakers and synthesizers and electronic drum sets. But that's an aside I shouldn't probably get into. They're going to do what they're going to do. They want to get the kids into it and keep them engaged. So if that's what it takes, then I guess that's what it takes.
Yeah, I think it's about keeping everybody entertained. Like you see some of these, if you call them prep rallies or whatever for these big football games, even myself, I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool, right? Because now the cheerleaders got something really hot to dance to, and they got real bass players throwing down bass grooves, but again, without the PA, so it is kind of mixed the modern, but just trying to keep that whole element of school band, make it cool again. Because I made the same mistake myself. I started with clarinet only because my parents couldn't afford a saxophone, so we actually have a lot in common with everything you just said there. So I played clarinet for 2 years, then I went to a new school where they actually had the instruments. So I'm like, oh, can I switch to saxophone? And they like, oh yeah, take the saxophone home. And I was like so excited. But once I got to high school, I'm like,
awesome.
I'm like, this isn't cool anymore. And I quit. And I regret that like almost every day. I still regret that. And then going to the drum thing, I'm left-handed myself. And my parents didn't know when I was a kid, oh, here's a right-handed guitar. Oh, okay. And my rhythm sucked forever because of that messed up thing in my head because when I first strum with the other hand, I'm like, and then same thing when I got on my drums, I finally got a kit like years ago. I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to set these drums up left-handed. And I did, and it all clicked. Just like you said for yourself, it all clicked. And now here I am, only because I've been playing on everyone else's drums for the last 20 years, which are always set up right-handed. But I've actually recently thought to myself, I should probably just try setting my kit up left-handed again and see if it'll help. I'll probably a bit of a mind fuck at first, but I think after hearing what you just said, I'm like, oh, I can connect with everything you just said, including the Pink Floyd. And I was lucky enough to have friends in high school that loved Pink Floyd too. So it was kind of, and that was because of my parents. I was raised on Pink Floyd, right? So, but anyways, continue on. I just wanted to intervene there.
Oh, I'm glad you did. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up the pep band. I had completely forgot about the pep band because I never was in the pep band. So yeah, the pep band was always, they were like the rock and rollers, right? They played the pep rallies. They gave the cheerleaders something to sort of dance to, and yeah, they were fun. And I never could understand, why don't we just play that kind of music during our halftime show, right? As the marching band. And well, the reason for that is because you got to go to these contests and you start to participate in this highbrow judging type kind of thing where they give out awards and congratulate each other for playing dead composer music. If you've never read The Real Frank Zappa, I highly recommend everybody go out and buy a copy of The Real Frank Zappa. It's cheap. You're not going to hate it. You're going to love it. He is, of course, kind of vulgar, but it is one of the most amazing reads. It's entertaining. I will say the last two chapters, you can kind of not read those because they are dedicated directly to his family when he was actually dying. And it's feels kind of weird reading them, honestly. So, but the first 80-90% of the book is devoted to explaining to you, his experience with the recording industry, with orchestras, with recording all kinds of numbers of things and dealing with numbers of all kinds of unions and record executives. Wow, what a life. But yeah, so and back to drums, left-handed, right-handed. it's really about being footed. It's really about your foot. So if you're going to play like a left-handed kit, it's you're leading with your left foot on the bass drum, and that makes all the difference in the world right there. I mean, I can train my hands a lot easier than I can train my feet. To train my feet, I have to go all the way back to square one and learn all of the bass rhythms all over from scratch again and completely train my brain all over again. And at this point, it's going to be 4 times as hard for me to do that because I've already ingrained all of that memory. There's a great video about a guy who made a reverse bicycle. You can find it on YouTube. I guess, backwards bicycle or reverse bicycle, and you'll find it. The idea is that when you try to turn the bicycle handlebars to the left, the wheel goes to the right. And the theory is that an adult can hardly learn how to ride this bicycle. It's almost impossible for an adult to learn how to ride this bicycle because we've learned how to ride a certain way, and there's so many unspoken, how do I say this? Like there's a lot of invisible things inside of our body that we shift our body when we ride a bicycle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That you don't really think about. You don't think about it. It's all just
hardwired in.
Yeah. I mean, think how hard it was to learn how to ride a bicycle. How many times you fell over, unless you were just, very adept at that. I myself, I was a late learner. I didn't actually learn how to ride a bicycle until I was 7. It took me 2 years before I could ride a bicycle. I was terrible. And so it's amazing, when you get to that point. But the other thing I would say about, being a left-handed drummer is it's awful. A lot of times you need to go play on someone else's kit. You need to play like at a festival, or there's like 5 bands playing, quick turnaround. They got a house kit. As a left-handed drummer, it's no fun, And also imagine me coming into your studio and you have no idea. You've already mic'd your drums. You've set the levels. You're like, hey, man, the drummer's going to love this because I've done all this hard work. Oh, I'm left-handed. Can we change everything and switch it all around? I've had engineers hate me before, but you know what? They weren't good engineers, right? I mean, and a good engineer, they don't judge on that level, I don't think. I would not consider myself to be a good engineer, to be quite honest, for what it's just on that level. I do consider you to be a great engineer. But yeah, we're going forward. Like when I got into college, I did go to college. I spent way too many years in college. I had a great time in college. I don't regret any year and anything, any bad decision or all of that led to the experience that I have to this day. Having said that, I cannot recommend kids go to college, young adults go to college anymore. If you do go to college, I'd say don't go right out of high school. Wait a couple years. If you're worried about you're not going to get some scholarship because you have to get the scholarship right out of high school, they have other scholarships you can get, trust me. But if you have a better idea of what kind of skills you want to learn, right, and then college is going to be a lot more useful to you. I started out in one field. I switched over to another, which I got a degree in, and that was recording industry. That happened at Middle Tennessee State University. I learned all things MIDI. I learned all things electronic music composition, film track scoring, and some level of how do I say it? Studio level analog multi-track recording and mixing. Definitely did not take that one to the full. I didn't take all the classes that they offered for that particular stretch. I focused on the electronic music composition. And because I was always a computer kid, that's one thing I didn't mention, was that early on, saxophone was first, computers were second. Right after I started playing saxophone, I got, I was programming, on a little Apple II Plus and whatever. But I was very adept with computers, but I didn't have anyone to take me to the next level. So that went by the wayside. So all during my, formative early college years, it was just music, focusing on music production. When I finally finished the program in the mid-90s, I was completely jaded with the recording industry, with the music industry. I had a great time up until that point. I played in a lot of local bands, did like a lot of local bar bands, crud bars, and, the crud club scene. Had a great time doing that. I was definitely not I was kind of a bad drummer. I was good, but I was too wild. I was kind of like a Keith Moon kind of drummer. I wanted to be like Neil Peart or Phil Collins, but I was more like just like a punk rock drummer. And managed to find a group of guys that needed a drummer like that. So we had a pretty cool band. We did some Frank Zappa covers. We did some Grateful Dead covers and Fish covers even. And some David Bowie covers, off of Ziggy Stardust. And then we started, some of the guys started getting into Guided by Voices. And they started getting more into indie rock, which was still kind of a cool thing in the late 90s. Indie rock was much cooler in the late 80s when it was called college rock, I think. Before REM and U2 were like really, really big before they completely blew up. But the indie rock scene was still pretty cool in the 90s, actually. There was a lot going on. You had the Geraldine Fibbers. You had, I don't have a list with me right now, and I'm not prepped on this, but there was a lot of really great bands. Was it Sebadoh? Clutch, was just getting started. And, this started leading to us playing a lot of different kind of music, And at that point, it was a very interesting thing happened to me, man. I mean, I just was completely jaded with the recording industry. I had no clue what networking was. And when I say networking, I mean, reaching out to people, calling people, handing them your card, letting them know what your services are and so forth. Finding work, hustling is really what that is. Networking is hustling. I had no clue how to hustle and get out there, and that's exactly what the kind of attitude you have to have, I think, in the recording industry. It takes a lot of hustling. So I went back to the nest. I retreated back to the nest, went back to college, and kind of a little bit shorter version of the story, very long. I got into computer science, and I ended up graduating with a second degree in computer science. And all, after 9/11, 2000, Y2K, board, was a software engineer. And I still played in bands. When I moved to New York, I had a great band in New York. We played some great shows in Brooklyn and Manhattan. We even went out and played a show in, was it Pittsburgh? Yeah. Another band, we went out and played down in Washington, D.C. when I was up there. So, and when I was out in L.A., of course, I played in a bunch of bands out in L.A. But, the whole time, like I'm focusing on career, And, it's just, I guess I really got out of music production because I didn't want to do it on a computer. And I don't want people to think that you can't do it or you shouldn't do music production on a computer. I think it's perfectly viable to do music production on a computer. I just couldn't feel inspired by doing that. It's important to be inspired. That's one of the most important things when it comes to, writing music. Unless you're, just doing it strictly for money and you're writing jingles, you don't necessarily need to be completely inspired, just inspired enough to spark an idea of what's going to represent the product that you're trying to sell. But, when you're really trying to reach out for that high art, man, just doing a little ding-a-ding-a-danga, and it ain't going to cut it, You just don't feel it. And the whole time you're trying to put that together, you're just like, oh, this ain't, this is awful, right? I've been there kind of through those motions and everything.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just going through the motions.
Right. As an artist, that's not going to cut it. There's other things where you can go through the motions and still cut it, but when you're creating, you can use that later on, but usually what ends up happening is you might try to muddle through something, and then maybe 2 weeks later you're feeling inspired and you're able to take that and do something with it, per se. But give you an example, like right now, I'm a little burnt out on, I'm uninspired right now, we'll say. I'm not completely inspired to just go out and start producing some music right now. I haven't done that, and it's been about 2 weeks since I've done anything. I recently just redid my studio, but it's sort of, I did it because I felt like this moment of like, you know what, I want to take a break. I need to just take a break. Jack Black said it best, I think. He called it that bottle of awesome sauce, or whatever he called it. You drink from that bottle, but if you don't want to drink it dry. You want to keep some in there, put the cork back on it, and save it for later.
Yeah.
So I'm using this opportunity right now to completely redo my studio, and I'm very excited about what I've been doing so far. I've got some big plans for what I've got going on here. But I did get a little bit off the beaten path there. Sorry. So here I am living in California, and I've just sort of got it made. I mean, I'm living in Marina Del Rey, and I've just got a really good job and making really good money and so forth. And I was just didn't want to do anything at that point. I didn't want to do software engineering anymore, just completely burn out. Now, there's really more to the story than that. I took off and I tried to do something, like start another career I don't really want to talk about per se. It's not really relevant. But just suffice to say that I went out and tried to do that, fell completely flat, came back to the West Coast, even got even more burned out, came back here to Tennessee, completely lost and bewildered. And that's when I, just started playing drums again, just sort of focusing on okay, I'm just going to play drums and just focus on honing. I don't know why. I had no reason why. I wasn't going to play with anyone or go out and be anybody's drummer per se. I just wanted to, let's get back to drumming again. It's good exercise, I guess. And that led me to getting back into electronic music production because I was watching videos on YouTube and, discovering things in drumming and getting into like the drumming videos and the drumming community on YouTube. And that led me to a little drum machine called the Pocket Operator Drum, PO12. Not drums, I'm sorry, rhythm. And one thing led to another. I went out and bought these little pocket operators for my niece and nephew for their like a Christmas present. It was right coming up on Christmas. And then I decided to go get a couple Korg Volcas. I got the Volca FM, which is a Yamaha DX7 clone in a sense. It's pretty cool. You can actually play all of the old patches that are available for the Yamaha DX7. We're talking tens of thousands, if not 100,000 patches that are out there readily available. And the controversial Volca kick. It's a little synthesizer that is dedicated to being nothing but a kick drum. That's all it does. It's a kick drum. It's completely analog though. And what I was told, and it even says it on there, it says MS-20 resonator on the filter. I buy this thing and I'm like, well, I don't have any clue what that means. MS-20 resonator whatsoever. And what Korg did is they had this old famous synthesizer there. It's called the MS-20. And the kick uses the filter, the resonator out of that synthesizer. And it actually, I have to work very hard to get it to sound like get a sound of intention, out of this thing. It definitely has a lot of ranges of sound that you don't want to use. But when you really spend a lot of time with it, it's really rewarding. One time I got it to sound like a real flabby analog kick drum. I was just, wow, how did the trick at this point, of course, is trying to figure out how to dial that up with intention. Every time be like, okay, here's how I can get that sound. And, the more I practice, the better I'll get at doing that.
Does the kick sound in there just come from one source, or can you choose from multiple sources?
Yes. That's the thing. It's not a sample. It's completely analog.
Okay.
It's just one source now, and but you can change the pitch of it though. You can make it boom 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 go all over the place.
Right.
And it will push some coils, man. It will allow whatever is driving it to throw that current into those speaker coils, and it will thump like nobody's business. So. A lot of people criticize, why would anybody want to buy like a synthesizer that all it does is, or like a drum machine that all it does is have just one voice, a kick drum. I'm as a drummer, I just raise my hand going, yeah, I'll buy one. I'll take that. Shut up and take my money. I get it, and I'm not expecting other people to get it, but it's like, wow, the kick drum is the root of all music, especially electronic music.
Yeah.
That's where it starts right there. You get that kick drum established where you feel it, you know what I mean? And that's a first step in establishing a real good groove, which is always my ultimate goal. I'm always, trying to get a good groove. Although a lot of what I've been doing in the past is I'm just whatever suffices, to tell you the truth. I'm just kind of phoning it in a lot of times with the drums because I can't change my drums and my jams easily. I'm not using the computer to sequence this stuff. A lot of people don't really understand what I'm doing, and more importantly, what I'm not doing to create this music. Like I'm not sequencing with any preset long range tracks. I don't have anything set up to where a verse, chorus type kind of situation. And when you do that, what I've discovered is that it's kind of better if you try to find something that doesn't get old, like the beat just sort of is, it's not too, not distracting, but not too noticeable per se. Like a lot of people want to use certain sounds in their drums they just like go like they just reach out and grab you and go, hey, I'm here, listen to me, look at me, like an earworm, just kind of constantly going in. So I'm trying to avoid sounds like that so that I can keep a longer going rhythm, going for longer without having to change it, if that makes any sense. It's sort of, there's a term for that. I lost it, but, a mother of invention type kind of thing. But where does that lead me? So I guess at this point, here we are. That happened about 2 years ago. I've been doing this now about 3 years. And, the first year that I was doing this, it was magic. It was a lot of magic. It was a lot of bewilderment because I did have this education, like this pre-existing knowledge, that I had not used. I garnered it in the early 90s when I was studying electronic music composition and MIDI. And I dabbled a little bit with GarageBand, over the years. I made a few tracks here and there, just to kind of like, hey, can I still do this? Make sure that I still could every once in a while. But this time I was like, oh, wow, man, I really felt a calling. So I just jumped head first. I started buying synthesizers. And it was at a time when I didn't even have a job. I didn't have any income coming in whatsoever. And it made no sense to be buying synthesizers. But it just, life wasn't telling me otherwise. Nothing was really coming around that was punishing me for doing this. So I just kept doing it. And, acquiring a little bit more. And a lot of it was gas-induced, gear acquisition syndrome. You see something, it's presented a certain way, and you hear something and you go, okay, I want that sound. That's the sound I want. And you immediately say, okay, that synthesizer can give me the sound that I want. I want that synthesizer. And at the time I was doing that, I did not understand that, okay, well, there's also 100 other synthesizers that can also do that sound. Now, I have to talk about this if you don't mind. This is actually kind of important, and that is understanding, that what the digital revolution in the 80s did to synthesizers, to electronic music. Before the 80s, everything was analog, and if you look right now, you will see a lot of the same available gear out on the market right now, doing the same kinds of things that they were doing in the 70s. Well, they kind of hit a brick wall in the 70s in terms of being able to sequence what they were doing, in terms of being able to save the patches. And, patch comes from patch cables, patching in cables into jacks to break or, connections or create other connections. And when you have a whole configuration of that, they call that a patch. And that's where we get the name patch, which is also called a preset. And so that's where we get the notion of those kinds of things. So artists. So you have two kinds of, well, you got all kinds of people, right? Here I go again with two kinds of people in the world. You've got people who know binary and those that don't. But 10 kinds of people in the world. Anyways, back then you had folks who wanted to make experimental music, so they were pretty happy with the interfaces that they had to do what they wanted to do. But you also had what I want to call, touring musicians, the guys in bands, the guys and girls that were playing, in the bands and rock and roll, whomever, Edgar Winter, Rod Argent, Palmer, Keith Emerson. Sorry, Palmer's the drummer. But all of these prolific synthesizer players, Rick Wakeman,
Yeah.
They came onto the scene, seeing these electronic synthesizers, they wanted these sounds, but they wanted a piano, right? They wanted an interface of a piano, and a piano has full polyphony, full voices. You can hit all of the keys and hear them all with articulation, and they resonate and they carry out for as long as the string in the body, can carry it, so forth. Well, to do that with an electronic means, it's a lot harder. It's a whole lot harder. So a lot of these synthesizers, they were monophonic. They were just one voice, and you needed more. You'd use more than one keyboard, synthesizer. That's why you see a lot of these, like Rick Wakeman, playing two at one time and maybe three at the same time. And they wanted more. They wanted to be able to save their patches, and who wouldn't? If you're a touring musician playing live in front of an audience, you don't want surprises. You want the show to go without a hitch. So when you're dealing with technology, and especially that kind of technology, there's going to be problems. So when the digital revolution hit, when those first affordable digital keyboards came out, they gave all the things to these players that they were not getting: full polyphony, full articulation, patches, being able to save, all their stuff and just press a button for the next song, and then you're ready to go. Seriously, that is important. That is very, very, very important. So I don't knock the need to have that. Some people kind of look at that like, well, it's those darn musicians that ruined everything. Well, maybe, the old stuff is still there though, right? It's not like you can't, it's just more choices. And as long as we have more choice, I think it's a good thing. But anyways, oh wow, oh my goodness gracious. Now we start getting into the rabbit hole of the digital and what it has sort of done and the samples, that was really, the samples. That's what sort of opened up, Pandora's box for the whole thing. Computers, just be the nature of digital. With computers, you're dealing with like the power and the storage, right? And then with the samples, you're dealing with being able to capture any sound in nature, that you can produce and to manipulate it and twist it into all kinds of ways into your music, into your art. And this gave rise to some of the first digital audio workstations coming out of your computers. I was trained on one called Digital Performer that was made by Mark of the Unicorn. And really all that we did was we used it to store our MIDI information. So we would have tracks, just like you would have tracks in a regular DAW, but we wouldn't store PCM data, audio, digitized audio. We would not store that. We would just store the MIDI information. So in a modern day DAW, you would see that, you see kind of two things. You either see like a piano roll, or those sort of like little dot things that represent the notes where they would be on a piano roll, or you see like a waveform, right? And the ones that are like the piano roll, well, that's your internal MIDI within the DAW system. We had an external MIDI router that would use to hook up a number of rack-mounted synthesizers to one sort of workstation synthesizer that had a key bed that we would use to control all of that. We also had an Akai sampler. I think it was like an S1000 or something like that. I don't know, early 90s Akai sampler. And, that thing was like $3,000 right there, that sampler, going back then. We used Roland D70 keyboards, which used the famous Roland LA synthesis, which is just simply, what they were doing is they were taking samples of real instruments, pianos, some brass. Brass always sounds corny, with synthesis.
Yeah.
But things that didn't sound so corny. And then you can also mix in your classic subtractive synthesis. So it's come full circle. Like what Roland is doing now is they're doing what's called virtual analog has been a thing for 30 years. Let me just say, virtual analog's been a thing for a long, long time. But Roland is doing something now where they're doing a form of virtual analog where they're trying to emulate the old circuitry of these old keyboards and then like run that through an emulator and then have the sounds come out. And it's pretty darn impressive, I think. It really is. It works better for some things than it does for others, though. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I don't want to just say off the bat, but like their version of the TB303 sounds very plastic. It sounds very preset-y. Like it sounds like mine sounds like everybody else's on YouTube. But their version of the SH101 sounds pretty darn good. It sounds amazing. Same thing with their version of the JX3P. And their drum machines, the TR-808 and the TR-909, their new digital versions, they sound great, I think. I think that drums can get away with being digital a lot more than a lot of other sounds because it's a short transient attack usually. It comes and goes very fastly. You're more interested in feeling the drums than really hearing them. And I think that's kind of where a lot of people who want to be like beat producers, like make beats and so forth. It's a lot of it's about how it feels and just how it sounds.
Yeah, the rhythm of it and the attack of, like you're saying, that transient, right? It's,
yeah, exactly. Because I mean, really, the interesting stuff is the other musicians,
the melody, the melody floating around it,
the harmonies, right? Yeah,
No, I think like you're talking how like in the synth world, everything's kind of gone back to the 70s. It's even in the guitar world too. You see all the companies releasing like reissues. All the amps are going back kind of that school. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Orange amps.
Oh yeah, classic.
Watching YouTube videos, Orange amp is on they're killing it. Every metal video I put on, alt rock video, Orange amp. And like my buddy's got one. They sound great, and they haven't changed nothing since the 70s. So I don't know if they kind of disappeared for the 80s and 90s, but they're back. And it's because that tone of the 70s was so great. Who does not want to go back and try to bring a little bit of that into their modern day music, right?
Oh, totally. I would love to talk about Steely Dan, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, no. What I have heard from different people, like the production on their album too. Like a buddy's like, "Oh, just listen to their mixes, right?" And then I listened to an engineer who worked with them, and he talked about like how they paid attention to all the details in the studio. They had the shortest patch cables and all these little things. They said added up to that final result. And back then, nobody was doing that kind of shit, right? Minus the players too, who were phenomenal. Like they got the best of the best on those tracks, right?
They were, yeah. They were taking it far. Yeah. They were going to extremes that a lot of other producers and engineers were not bothering to go to. But everybody was striving to do like the best that they could do to produce the best sounding tracks in the 70s, just like they are in the 80s, just like they are in the 90s. But back then, they had to do everything the hard way. Nothing came for free. Everything came at a cost. Like if you wanted to do this, you had to give up that. This, like it was constant compromising to get those sounds. And the reason why I point back to Steely Dan, they're 70s and going up to Gaucho 1980. Their new stuff, it's, just listen to it because you like the music. Yeah, the production's great, but by then, the modern day Steely Dan productions are no greater than any other modern day productions, because at that point, everybody's using all the same bag of tricks, using the same plugins and presets that you can do. I mean, we have mastering presets now, for crying out loud, right? I mean, that's a little audacious. I think it's great. I mean, a large part of me is always, hey, whatever tools you can get to people who can't afford this kind of stuff normally, all the better, man. The more choices, and I think people should be able to, do this stuff, right? First and foremost. But people get lost too. They forget, that there's really, this is an industry. This is teamwork. It really, if you're really serious about your art, I would, do a couple things on your own, and throw it, see, make sure that people like it and so forth, and you're on the right path. But then, if you can, I don't know, maybe invest $10,000 or something, and that you're going to get results from that $10,000, go to a studio, and have someone else record you, and maybe have someone else produce you too. Don't just do everything yourself. I had the opportunity to go to a mastering studio, 2003 in Nashville, a band that I was playing in. We almost got signed. We really did. We came very, very close to getting signed, and it didn't work out. It's hard. It's really, really hard to jump through all of the hoops of fire and pass all the tests, tribulations, trials that you've got to get through to make it as an artist. But I had a few close, maybe. This one was pretty close. But the cool thing is we got to go to this mastering studio, and I got to actually see the mastering process. And two things. The guys that were doing it, there was like three guys in there. Two of them looked like they were, in their 50s, maybe 60s. One of them was their, I don't want to say he was an intern. He was the guy that, that they were training. He was their new employee. And all of these guys were trained at listening to frequencies. They can pick out 1,000 hertz. They can pick out, up to 15 or whatever, I mean, hey, look, we do lose our hearing when we get older. So even those older dudes, they definitely cannot hear above 15, but they don't need to. They use the meters. They know how to also read the measurement tools that they had at their disposal. But all that they were doing, right? All that you're really doing with mastering is you're just making sure that your music plays well with the other kids on the radio. When you go from one song to the next on the radio, you want it to be smooth and consistent, you know? Just like right now when you're listening to a podcast like this, you want to hear the same volume level between myself and the host, you know? You want to hear like a nice even consistency, and that's what mastering really brings to the table. And, you know, I can't even, they must have had $1 million worth of equipment in that mastering studio. And I'm talking, you know, it was a very small amount of equipment. It was all right there in 2 racks, and it was all tube driven. It was all like old school analog meters, you know, and, you know, just that build quality looked like just that rich, creamy vintage 50s. And that just screamed like so much money. You know, you're just like, oh my, you don't even want to like look at it. You're afraid you're going to scratch it if you look at it, you know?
Yeah, no, I've looked at mastering compressors, limiters, and EQs, and they're still, you're looking at $10,000 a piece. You can find some decent pieces for $5,000 a piece, but even then, so it's kind of.
I would say just stick with the digital.
Yeah. But no, there is something to be running your stuff through that analog circuitry. That's all you even have to do, right? Just like even with I got 2 analog EQs here now, and I just run it through, pretty much hit the tubes, give a little boost at 60, a little boost at 8, and it's like, holy fuck. You don't even have to add those boosts, but you run it through an EQ, you might as well get a little something out of it. But at this point, I am still just doing all my mastering in the box, but eventually I would like to set up a decent mastering chain using analog gear just to have, even using some of the stuff I already have and possibly get some more. But when I am mastering in the box, I'm using plugins that are emulating all those classics, like the Fairchild compressor, the Pultec EQ, a little bit of tape saturation.
And it sounds good, don't it?
Yeah, they're close, but obviously if you had the real thing in your studio, you're going to run it through and deal with the little bit of white noise you might get from that analog gear, but it's a fair trade.
I think it is. I do. I'm definitely not looking into any of that equipment anytime soon. I would love, though, if someday I can say that, okay, I'm going to have to buy some mastering equipment. That would be a great future. Excuse me. But so that is here's something that I've been trying to figure out, and I think I have an answer. So I'm going to dare say go out on a limb here. What I'm about to say may be false. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt. But from what I gather so far, there is really no such thing as a digital amplifier. Think about that for a second. So when you're doing things digitally, when you're dealing with digital signal processing, well, right there, that's exactly what you're doing. You're doing digital signal processing. You're dealing with sort of like a sandbox realm inside of a processor. And it is basically doing math to calculate what the resulting frequencies, what the resulting waveform at that given slice in time is going to look like. I hope that made sense. So when you're in that realm, you know, you sort of have this gain staging, right? I mean, you don't ever introduce any noise when you go take a digital signal from one stage to the next, because all you're doing is you're just manipulating the math behind what would actually be manipulating that signal. And so that's what's going on with that digital kind of stuff. So at the end of the day, though, here's where it gets funny. At some point, you have to produce an electric signal that can actually drive, you know, a current. Now, you could do this digitally and you could beef it up and everything, but it's like you still have to go through an op amp at the end of the whole thing. So no matter what, it's like you still have to go through an analog op amp. So I can almost guarantee you that in every piece of gear we've got over here, what's happening at the output, your line level or whatever output's coming out, you know, even power, there's an op amp right before it, analog.
Well, you're talking about our playback, like our speakers or whatever amps powering our speakers. That's what you're referring to now.
So, say my mixer, for example.
Yeah.
You know, there are so many op amps in this thing. It's not even funny. You know, the op amps are just all over the place. Like anytime you have like a buffer for your guitar, like just like a buffer pedal, it's just an op amp. And it's configured a certain way so that it can turn voltage into current. Essentially, it's like a power amplifier. It's really complicated, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Is in my studies, I'm looking at all this stuff, and well, at the end, digital, you do have to go through a digital to analog converter, no matter what. And and of course, once you get to that analog signal that's coming out, you usually go through an op amp for all kinds of reasons. For impedance matching, for just to buffer the signal, just mainly for impedance matching though. Also, if you know what common mode rejection is, it's not common mode rejection. I already forgot the term, but whenever you have a balanced signal, coming out of a mixer or something, you have the non-inverted signal on the hot, and you have the inverted on the neutral. And then whenever it goes into the next stage, like whatever piece of gear that's feeding that in, reading it in, or whatever. Like, for example, my Focusrite audio interface, it takes those two signals. It takes the inverted signal, goes through an op amp to re-invert it, and then goes through another op amp to find the difference between the two, and it gets rid of it. So any interfering noise that might get picked up onto my audio cables, will theoretically be rejected through common mode rejection. And all of that happens through op amps. And so, if any of those features are in your digital gear, it's like, okay, well, it's analog coming out. It starts to twist your head a little bit. And, I think it's enough to confuse consumers so much that, the industry, especially salespeople, salespeople only know what they know, and they don't know a lot about electronics. The ones that do probably don't stick in sales for very long. It would be fun to be a salesperson, though, just to find out for myself. But, there's so much misinformation, and I definitely hope that what I just said was not contributing to misinformation. But, look into this. This is something that I'm.
Yeah, well, a good example would be a Line 6 guitar amp, where it's basically all those presets, but before it hits that area inside the amp where it's probably a bunch of chips and whatnot doing what it does to bring all your favorite sounds with one click, it's probably hitting some op amps, and then on the way out of that, it's like you're saying, probably hitting some op amps, right?
Yes, and don't forget, chips are analog.
Yes, you've told me that in the last conversation we had there, which took me a bit to wrap my head around, but I know what you're saying. It's yeah.
Yeah, it's like it has to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's like when I got into this, I've got to think about this. I've got a computer science degree, 15 years of experience as a software engineer, and I still think that computer chips there's tiny computers inside of them. That's how I thought computers worked. Okay, well, the computer chips have computers in them, and then wait, how does that work? It doesn't. No, it has to start somewhere, and really all that's in these chips are just transistors. These brilliant configurations, patterns, if you will, of transistors that do essentially gain staging, for lack of a better word. I mean, that's not what it is, but for like an audio engineer, it's like there's a whole lot of gain staging going on inside that little chip. So the thing is that people think that chips are bad, that they do something bad to the sound because they're not vacuum tubes. You lose this warmth. They're solid state, so they give this cold edge to it or something. And it's like, no, that's not the truth. Now, you could have a bad chip in the sense that it's, I don't know, wasn't designed as best as it could be, or maybe it was limited by the technology at hand. That's the case with a lot of old digital stuff. Why it sounds crap, is because it's old digital stuff. And it was, with digital, you need a fast clock rate. You need to get into the gigahertzes, if you can. And back then, we were still in the megahertzes. So you hear this aliasing, you hear stepping when you do like a filter sweep. There's all kinds of ways that digital artifacting shows up. And, we've come a long way, baby. It's gotten to where digital sounds like really, really good. People still want to go back to analog, though. I think one reason because, the analog sound does have more variation. Now, we can fake this with digital, but not a lot of people are really doing that. There's the ones that are really making leaps and strides, though. But the other thing is that, what people aren't doing is like, if you want to go analog, you kind of want to do what I'm doing. I'm not recommending people do what I do. It's very expensive. But by using a mixer and by allowing some of this line noise to come in, like my mixer introduces a level of like white noise and everything. I'm creating this sort of ambience. I still don't have the science to describe it, but there's this sort of like ambience about the music that I'm able to produce. It doesn't sound like it's in a box. Like everything that comes from a computer strives to be like the perfect signal level. Everything's like, pushing to the edge without distorting or clipping, and it's like you can't really get away with that in digital. So you got to back things off. And, things are a little softer kind of sometimes, warmer in a sense. And a lot of that is just because, of all of the things that we got away from by going digital. So if you want to get that sound back, that 70s sound, it's kind of like, you kind of do want to spread out your signal in a sense. But let me get back to the transistors real quick before I get away from that. The advantage of things like, the transistors and these chips that have all these integrated circuits that have these transistors inside of them is that you remember you said it before, like with Steely Dan, one of the things that they were doing was like really short patch cables, right? Well, you can't get any shorter than what's inside a transistor. I mean, we're still getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but I mean, as a regular human, I personally can't produce anything smaller than what's in a chip. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that right there, you talk about not introducing unwanted noise because your signal, because your pathway is too long. Well, that's kind of what chips have brought to the table. Anybody who wants to get into vacuum tube type kind of stuff, I say, go for it, man. I love vacuum tubes. They're exciting. That's exciting stuff. That's like, mad scientist kind of stuff, So I'm all for that. But I think a lot of people still have a lot of false notions about what tubes really bring to the table. And, well, if you kind of find out the hard way, well, just make a video on it is what I would tell people. Do a video and show us why using a tube for that particular application wasn't the best choice. I mean, like if what I'm getting at is this: is that a lot of people are going to want to build oscillators out of vacuum tubes, and I think it's already been shown time and time again that vacuum tubes really are not cut out to make good oscillators. They just aren't. And this brings to the next thing is an oscillator, really its only function is to produce a stable waveform. You want it to be able to change the pitch. You want to be able to have it, in tune, right? You want the pitches to be in tune, whatever you kind of change them to. And if for any given wave shape, you want it to be as perfect as possible. And the only way to really get a perfect shape, well, you can't. The only way to do it is digitally. But the problem there is that as soon as you convert it to analog, it's no longer perfect because you get the stair stepping, just because of the nature of the clock that's driving the digital signal. And so, we're never going to get perfection, I don't think. And the only way that we're going to get perfection is if we upload our brains into the digital circuit itself, into the digital signal processing algorithms itself. And let's not do that, folks. Please, let's not do that. But the oscillator and the wave shape and all of that, that's really the only function of the oscillator is to produce a robust, I dare say, as perfect possible waveform. That's it. You see, people think that the oscillators sound different. Like if a square wave, if one oscillator that produces a square wave sounds different than another oscillator that produces a square wave, it's because their square waves are different. If they were able to produce the same square waves, they would sound the same. And it's all the stuff after the oscillator. That's all of the sugar and spice and everything nice. Your filters, your envelope generators, which quick aside on envelope generators, that's, as far as I can tell, with electronic music and synthesizers, the envelope generator is one of the few things that was actually invented by synthesizers for electronics. I don't think anybody else was using that particular circuit or had any idea to use that kind of thing. And we talked about this last time. Bob Moog invented that. One of his engineers, said, "Hey, it would be really great if I could play a note and have it start with a nice attack and then taper off and then just sort of finally just completely decay out, just like a piano does." And Bob's engineer, went out to lunch, came back, and Bob had invented the thing in 1 hour. And to this day, nobody's really changed it. Like what he came up with was the perfect solution right out of the bat. That's genius for you. People say that Bob Moog is the father of, electronic music or synthesizers and so forth. And yeah, I'm not gonna. The man was a genius. He gave so much to this whole arena that we are able to make art with.
Yeah, the Moog back in the day, kind of going back to the 70s again, right? But and now what's reappearing in a lot of modern music.
Oh yeah, they're killing it, man.
Yeah.
Moog's great. I love Moog. I do. They're very expensive. I can attest that the build quality, of their gear is top notch. You're getting what you're paying for is quality, and of course that sound, that they're known for. It's great. I mean, hey, I'm not going to say like it's the best sound in the world. It's a really good sound. It's a sound that I like. There's other sounds out there that are just as good as that Moog sound, as far as I'm concerned. Like Sequential is really, really good. On the digital front, you got like Electron, which is not one of my favorite companies, but man, they're killing it. People love them to death, and they definitely have their own signature sound. They have their own unique character. But and then you got everybody wants to hate on Behringer right now, right? And the thing is about Behringer, though, I mean, I will say, I'm buying a bunch of Behringer stuff for myself, and I'm not going to recommend that other people do that. And in fact, if you want to sell me your Behringer gear, sell it to me. The thing is that Behringer is kind of the opposite of Moog in a way. Their build quality is good, but it's not as good. And there's a good chance that some of the capacitors in there on the printed circuit boards may go bad, and they may need to be replaced, and I'm trying to put myself in a position to where I can fix my synthesizers and other people's synthesizers, hopefully. So I'm not really worried about that, but right now there's so many rumors going around the board, and I still think Behringer is doing a great thing. I don't know anybody else, where you can go and if you time it just right on sale or secondhand, you can get their version of a Pro 1 for $300. And it's a Pro 1. It doesn't have a key bed. And hopefully you're the kind of person who knows how to use a synthesizer like that. You don't need to have a key bed attached to every synthesizer that you purchase. There are some people that are like that. I don't think they really understand MIDI fully. There is a nice immediacy to being able to walk up to any piece of gear and be able to hit something and make notes out of it. There's definitely a bit more of a pause when I'm doing things, when I have to switch MIDI channels on a piece of gear and things may go wrong. All kinds of technical difficulties creep in, so I get that. I really do. But I feel like I'm saving so much more money by buying synthesizers that don't have to have key beds attached to them. And I'm saving a whole lot of room too. It's more like a rack mount, mentality, where you have like a rack mount unit and you get all the patch bays set up and everything, and you can just patch in whatever you need to. It's kind of a remote kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of work, and when things go wrong, you've got to start, digging in and taking everything apart and finding, the root of the cause. So I get that people don't necessarily want to do that, but you can get for $300, you get this Pro 1, and I'm pointing out that particular one as opposed to say the Wasp or the Cat or the Model D or the Neutron or the K2, because the Pro 1 is just one of the most amazing sounding, beautiful synthesizers I've ever heard. The Mini Moog, like the Moog sound, the Model D, they do the bass. I like their bass better, but for the high end stuff, I like the Sequential a lot better. And it has to do with the filters. Now, I can't tell you what about the filters, but that plus there's one thing that the Pro 1 has that I discovered. It has a glide feature that it sort of glides on a threshold, if you will. It only glides when you're really close, or it's either really close or really far away. I think it's really far. So if you're really close, it doesn't do like a whole lot of gliding. But if you do like really low, you can get like a big wow, like that kind of Keith Emerson kind of lead kind of going. It's cheating. I consider that kind of thing a sort of a performance hack, I don't mind it though. That still requires a lot of talent. It's not completely cheating in my books if you still have to incorporate some talent, some skill.
Yeah, it's about timing from like the one key to the next note, just so it triggers that thing it's going to do for you within context of what you're jamming on, right?
Exactly. Have you ever heard of Ronald Jenkins on YouTube?
No.
Oh, he's great. You gotta go check him out. I mean, he's a hoot. He plays funk synthesizers. He is just so funky. I don't even know how he does it, but like he's just a master of the pitch bend. So you got those two wheels on the left side of the keyboard. One is the modulation wheel that kind of gives you a tremolo effect, and the other one is like a pitch, so like bending the notes literally.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So like when you're bending notes on a guitar, that's the same thing that I'm talking about right here.
And so he's riding that wheel lots?
Yeah, he's doing it he's doing it all by himself. No cheating like I'm talking about at all. He's riding the wheel. So like he'll have the pitch bend up before he goes to the note. Like his ears are so good. His intonation is so amazing. Like how he knows where to be and all that kind of stuff. If I could play like that, but whatever. I'll stick to drums, I guess.
So let's talk a little bit about, like you said, about 2 years ago, you got into electronic engineering and you've been taking online courses to pursue that further?
Well, it's all been self-study. So no online courses per se, just, the University of YouTube, if you will. YouTube has an amazing wealth of an archive of videos out there, going back to day one of YouTube.
Right.
So, yeah, go ahead. Question.
And you were telling me about those 3 books. I wrote them down. If maybe you mentioned those books there, if anyone's listening, might be interested. Those books you said would get you a good start in the game if this is something that interests other people.
Most indeed. So, the first book, I think anybody who is wanting to be an audio engineer or, just understand anything about music production is the Sound Reinforcement Handbook that was put out by Yamaha. You can get that on Amazon right now for under $20. It was written in the mid-late 80s. It's not the most well-written material, in my opinion, but it's very comprehensive. I mean, it's got a wealth of information all right there, and it has everything you need to branch out to other sources if you need to. Plus, not to mention, it's a lot of stuff that really applies to music production prior to 1995, dare I say, or it's definitely 20th century music production. So if you want to get some history, some understanding of why the things and where they build from, I think this is a great book to start from. The second book is relatively hard to find and it's expensive. And it's called Audio System Design and Installation. And it is more of a construction worker's book. It's more like what you did. I want to build a studio from the ground up. This is a book I wish that you had had. I was reading this book the whole time. I'm thinking, man, I wish Jeremiah had a copy of this book. You did everything right, I think. If you listened, and you worked very well with your electrician to follow all safety codes and everything, but at the same time were able to handle any potential ground loop issues that you might, potentially have in your studio, then you came out gold. The only thing that you really, with the primary focus of that book is, producing a noise-free studio. Just that simple.
Right, getting rid of any interference from
anything. It covers the ground, all across the board. It has a great chapter on the decibel. The first book I mentioned does a great job talking about decibels. So, these books, you're going to learn how to do decibels, how to convert decibels. You're going to understand more about headroom, all that kind of stuff. A lot of it, getting into some acoustic sound design, not too much. I do have another book, though, that I'm going to get into. I should mention that, a fourth book, if you don't mind. It's called Fundamentals of Music Acoustics. And so far, I love it. It's pretty good. It was about $20. You can get it on Amazon, too. It's cheap. If you really want to, just have a good book, like this is kind of like, reading material. You can kind of at nighttime before you go to bed, or even to keep it in the bathroom, just side stuff that you can read every day, just a little bit here, digest a little bit there. It's good stuff. And so the fourth book, now this one, this is the Bible for electronics, and it's called The Art of Electronics. I got my copy for about $20, I think, $25. It's one of the older editions. It's not the latest edition, which is, I think, fourth edition, whatever. So Amazon's selling it like, the newest one for like maybe $70, $80 right now, brand new. It's not a cheap book. And it's kind of the book that I would say, if you already have a college degree kind of thing and you're used to that kind of level of study, it's like a book that you can pick up and read, and it's almost like you're taking a course at college. It's kind of like a college course book, but it's not. And that's what I love about it. It is so hard to really convey, because it's genius how they don't shy away from the real hardcore math or the hardcore concepts that just completely make your brain split and melt. But they don't really go into the math of it. And they say, that's the brilliance of electronics, is that you don't have to be precise with your calculations. You just need to be accurate. And that's a brilliant thing. It's like if you calculate, this needs to be 900 ohms of resistance. They don't make a 900 ohm resistor. So you could, do the configuration where you get a bunch of resistors and put them in parallel to try to get your total ohms down to 900. Or you could just use a 1K resistor, it costs a penny. If you have to use 3 resistors to make up 900, that's awful. That's when you could have just used 1. If you're actually making this stuff yourself, like soldering your own components and building your own circuits, you don't want to design for 3 when you can just use 1. That's going to be a pain in the butt you don't want to deal with. So it's an amazing book, but I will say it right now. Good luck reading it. I understand about half of it. There's the second chapter is on transistors, and I think I tried to read through that chapter 4 times before I just gave up and just went on to chapter 3. That was chapter 2. So I think really what the Art of Electronics is it's a book for electrical engineers after they've graduated. It's the kind of okay, here's all the crap that they taught you in school, and here's how it really works.
Yeah, almost like music. You kind of forget what you learned and then look at it in a different perspective to maybe open up your mind to new opportunities and possibilities with what you've already learned.
Totally. I think it's very good to be theoretical, but, good old application. 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of these happy accidents have come into play. I've heard a lot of stories about the old timers with their analog gear. They send it off to get fixed. The guy sends it back and it doesn't sound like it did, but they love how it sounds. Or the one guy's like, "Oh, your compressor's broken." He's like, "Well, then don't fix it."
Yeah. Oh yeah, what was it? That Marty Freeman song? I can't think of it right now, but yeah, it was the one that invented fuzz. It basically invented death metal, and it was a country western song recorded in the 60s. One of the tracks on the mixer was the preamp was it was clipped, or it was gone. It was blown. And there's this little bass, there's a bass solo. It's just boom, 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 boom. It's like a little dopey kind of bass solo, doping along, And it just comes through, man. You got to hear this. It's what's it called? It's I'll Be Gone or something like that. Well, you'll hear it. And if you've never heard it before, you're going to laugh. You're going to get a big grin on your face. It's too much, man. And it literally, that's what started fuzz. That what is literally what started fuzz. And fuzz is the first and last, of the distortion kind of thing. The first one was overdrive. I'm sorry. So the first distortion was overdrive, and that came from overdriving a vacuum tube. Again, we're not using vacuum tube for oscillators, right? We're using vacuum tubes to amplify and to sort of sweeten the sound up in some way, to filter it, And so some people discovered if you overdrove the amplifier a certain way, hit past its saturation, perhaps, if I'm understanding correctly, you'd get this kind of pleasing, distorted sound. It was distorted, but yet it was pleasing. And then after that was this fuzz discovery. And fuzz, from what I understand, is that's where it really gets difficult. You get a certain pedal that sounds a certain way, and it's you don't ever want to mess with that. You'll never get it. If you change any of the components, it's not going to sound like that ever again. You're dealing with a lot of germanium. So one of the first semiconductors that we were using was germanium, and germanium is much less stable than silicon. So when you see these things, right, they're advertised as op amp. Well, first of all, you see op amp. If that's what they're advertising the pedal as is an op amp, just laugh at it. If it sounds good and it looks good, you like the way it looks, and you then get it, buy it, love it, whatever. But if they're trying to sell it that it's an op amp, it's kind of like, really? I don't have a good comparison for you to say like what that would be like. It'd be like, these bananas come with peels, Okay, great. That's how I want my banana to come with a peel, The other ones you might see are like germanium, and that's going to be a very unstable like fuzz. So, temperature will change the way it sounds. If you play out, and yeah, totally, So if you do see op amp, what it should say, that's the same thing as solid state. That's the exact same thing. That's what solid state means. It means it's just the transistors are inside an integrated circuit.
So solid state logic is
same thing.
So that means like all those boards won't have like one will be very consistent with another.
No, not necessarily. It's all it means is that it's using integrated circuits. The transistors are inside the integrated circuits, and that little solidness, that's what they mean by solid state. It's a marketing ploy. It means nothing. It meant something back in the day, I guess what it meant was like, okay, well, let's put it this way. There is a big difference in hard drives. The difference between a solid state hard drive versus like one that uses disc and platter. Now that's a big difference because, solid state, you can bang it around. You can drop it on the ground. It's very robust. To a degree. Some chips, it just depends, just depends. Some of them are very susceptible to damage from gravity, but no, most of them are not at all. And so yeah, the other one, like, so germanium, right? If you see that it's a silicon fuzz, that just means that it's going to be more stable. That probably means solid state. Same thing as op amp. You'd have to open it up and look. It could all be discrete transistors. I think the cool thing about discrete circuits, which don't use integrated circuits, again, all an integrated circuit is you just have all those transistors are configured inside a nice little convenient package. And the discrete, is what we had before. It's like all those transistors are connected onto some kind of a PCB or something. Their legs touch each other, And so I guess, like, one convenience of maybe having a discrete circuit is that you can experiment with the components. You can, pick and choose and take some out, put some in, and see how the sound changes and so forth. You can't really do that if it's all in one integrated circuit. But the thing is, though, is that when you buy an integrated circuit, like, the more you do this, the more you kind of figure out that, it's all bread and butter stuff, man. They're actually saving me, like, they're doing me a huge favor by giving me this integrated circuit. It's like saving me a ton of work that I otherwise would have to do myself and end up with, probably something that doesn't really sound that good, When you, like I built a distortion pedal, and it's okay, but I wouldn't sell it to anybody. I wouldn't expect them to be, satisfied with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's the first one that I built. How good could it possibly sound? But I learned so much by building it. And that's why I built it, and I use it in my jams from time to time. But I have other pedals that would sound better.
So now that you got all this like new information and knowledge, I know you said it's great because now you can actually fix your synths and also understand kind of what's going on under the hood. Where else could you take this, what you're going with right now, kind of?
Well, it's a good question. That is something that I looked into, and I was wanting to find a career switch. Is there some way that I can, do this? And the sad story is that I feel like that career of like being a synthesizer repairman or like, a gear technician, it's kind of going away. And I'll tell you why. And I'm not just saying that because that's how I feel. I actually hung out with somebody in Nashville who is a synthesizer technician. He repairs synthesizers, and he has his own business. And, he kind of gave me some inside information on like what's going on just to give you an idea, he had a synthesizer. It belonged to an artist. He didn't tell me who it was, and they spilled Coke on it. They did something stupid. And they spilled beverage all over it, and then I think they got into it and they tried to fix it themselves, and they did something stupid and messed it up even further. And that, I don't care who you are, that kind of sort of voids the warranty, But the what do you call it? I mean, I lost a word there. Because I don't want to say the name of the company, but the company, right? That would honor, the artist's gear. Told the repairman, it's like, well, just I'm sorry, I can't really state this really well. It's like they basically just told him, like, well, you're screwed. Repair it, you don't get paid for it. They get whatever they want, you get nothing. And I looked at him when I heard all that, and I said, like, they want to get rid of your career, don't they? They just want to phase all y'all out, don't they? He said, yes, they do. Yes, they do. They want to get to a point to where it's like, if there's something wrong with your piece of gear, you just send it back to whatever. They give you another one, replace it. Nobody really fixes anything anymore. A lot of the technicians, like, you can go be like a repair technician. A lot of what they're doing is they're just going out to, like, wherever the call is, and they're just replacing huge unit components. They're not actually troubleshooting and finding out, like, well, okay, it's just like a switch, or it's just like a capacitor or something, or it's even like if it's just a blown fuse. Probably not if it's a blown fuse, but they just replace a whole unit of the gear instead of actually troubleshooting. And so your job is relegated to just real bread and butter, kind of dumbed down. You're not actually employing your intelligence at that point. You're just paint by number, replace this component, that wire to that wire, that thing to that thing, you're done.
Yeah, it's definitely a bummer that electrical engineering has almost become a lost art. So it's really inspiring to see you and other people trying to keep that alive so we can still create new things as we go forward, and also have people to be able to fix our old things when they break down. But I see we're almost out of time here, Haze, so I got one last question for you. It's hypothetical, but if you're able to put your dream band together, who would you have in your dream band? It could be anybody, both alive and or dead.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was not prepared for that one. That's great. Okay, so I guess I would want to play drums, but let's just say, for example, maybe that I'm not in the band, so I'll just pick everybody. It's my favorites, the drummer, I guess I'd go with Neil Peart. I'd probably pick Phil Collins, though, to sing. So I'd have him sing. And you know what? I'd get Stuart Copeland in there somewhere. I don't know. I'd want him to play bass. That would make no sense. I would relegate him. I would elevate him to be the bass player. How about that? So for a guitar player, Buckethead.
Hell yeah.
Man, I got to get Buckethead in my band. But you know what? I want two guitar players. So I'd also get Ed Wynn. Wynn. And of course, I don't expect anybody to know who Ed Wynn is. Unfortunately, he is the brains behind my favorite band of all time, Ozric Tentacles. He's a great guitar player. He's a great synth player. And so I'd have two guitar players, Buckethead and Ed Wynn. I think they'd be able to definitely work together pretty well. I think they'd hit it off really well. And Stuart Copeland on bass, Phil Collins singing, Neil Peart on drums. And then for keyboards, I'd get... well, I can't think of his name right now. Rupert Greenwald? Rupert Greenwald from The Fix. One of the most unsung heroes of the synthesizer world. And more people need to look back. I think, if you're into synthesizers, check out the band The Fix, that FIXX. Because, he was doing some amazing stuff with synthesis in the 80s when nobody was real. When everybody was just so... seduced by the magic, of everything, and unable to really know what anything even was. It's just, everything was just a beautiful wall of sound back then. And there's all these amazing synthesizers, that are like, have just as much history and infamy as certain guitars and basses.
Yeah, I'll have to go check them out myself.
Yeah, like he was like playing like the PPG wave, when nobody else was. Again, I don't expect, only a few people are really going to know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's like me, like life is a series of a hope of reflecting back and looking back and realizing the things that you didn't know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and just being able to appreciate that.
Yeah.
Not you don't feel mad or feel any regret. It's like, oh wow, isn't that funny how I didn't understand that. Life is so special.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting lineup you got there. That's cool.
Just off the top of my head, it would change if you asked me yesterday or tomorrow, it would change.
Well, it's just like, what's your favorite album? What's your favorite band? It's always changing.
I like that one, man. What's your favorite dream band? That's a good one.
Well, thanks, Haze. It was great having you on the show today, man. I appreciate you sharing some time with us, giving us a little insight into the world of electronic engineering, into making music and madness with synths. So keep on tweaking with those transformers, those resistors, those wires, and definitely keep pumping out those jams, man. Until next time. Cheers.
Great talking with you, brother.
You're listening to the UnderGunned Productions Podcast.